Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Inspiring Thoughts podcast this week. We're very lucky to have Pip Lawrence with us. And Pip is the Wellbeing Director and Speaker at Wellbeing People Ltd. So, Pip, great to have you on board.
Hello. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
Yeah, really good and great to see you again. So in advance, Pip's had 7 questions sent to her to give a bit of preparation for today to aid the discussion. Before we dive into kind of the questions, Pip, would you just tell our listeners about your career history or kind of your plotted path?
Yeah, absolutely. So in a whistle-stop tour, I guess, I started as a personal trainer and really loved working with people, but really didn't enjoy the lack of empowerment that I felt that I was doing people a big disservice. So people would often come to me with this, Pip, help me get fit, lose weight, and this very sort of like you can fix me approach. And what I found was that it just then wasn't very sustainable, because if I went on holiday or whatever, they would use those phrases of I've fallen off the bandwagon, one of my pet peeves. And so I felt like all I was ever really doing was just sort of putting a bit of a bandage over what was clearly a bigger issue. So through, I guess, my career, I ended up traveling for a long period of time, and that gave me a bit of worldly insight into, I remember being in Cambodia, and obviously Cambodia had experienced a horrible genocide, in my lifetime. But the people seemed so happy. So many of the people I seen were so happy and healthy. And I remember calling home and people sort of moaning about the weather, or seemingly very small things that were really affecting people back home. And I thought, well, what's going on there? So a number of different things through traveling, and then I worked on public health programs where I worked very closely with a psychologist and a dietitian, and amazing programs, but they couldn't get anyone in front of them. I'd turn up to deliver some of these programs and there'd be like one family there. And so I eventually sort of put this together and thought, right, well, I was working in a private sector, in the gyms, they were getting, I don't know, 700 new members in a month. Like, it was crazy the amount of people that they were attracting, but the programs weren't really designed to help people long term, and it wasn't sustainable changes that were happening. And then on the flip side, I'd worked in public health where the programs were incredible, really written with all the latest research and things. But, it doesn't matter if it's a great program if there's no one in front of you to actually effect change on. So I tried to put these two worlds together, started my own business in 2014, which was a sort of a combination of, I'd say, personal training and then some behavioural change coaching, and it eventually evolved into what is now the Recalibrate Wellbeing program. In 2019, I merged with Wellbeing People, and then was appointed their Wellbeing Director. And that's pretty much how I got my title. I have to say as well, because I get reached out to people, or people reach out to me all the time on LinkedIn saying, how did you get to become a Wellbeing Director? This is the honest truth. My MD said to me, Pip, we've already got, we need you to be a director. We already have a sales director, a marketing director, an operations director. Like what can we make you a director of? And I just went, I don't know, director of wellbeing. And the irony is, so many people reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, Pip, how did you get to where you are? And I kind of want to say, I made up my job title.
Isn't it fascinating though? Sometimes I love that when people go, how did you do that? And you go, well, I just did this. And it's that simplicity that I love within children, the simplicity and the easiness, whereas adults look for overcomplicated things to say it's got to be. I love that honesty of, well, I just picked that title. That was the best thing. Yeah, good on you. I love that.
I'm as transparent as they come. So there's no airs or graces with me, unfortunately.
But I love the bit as well about when you said earlier about empowering people rather than they just hold on to it's Pip getting me fitter rather than themselves getting fitter and owning those behaviours. I find it from a human psychology fascinating point of view that if we can get people to walk and look after themselves, they're going to be better, stronger for themselves and really feel that. Whereas actually if they keep holding on to other people, they're doing it for the other people, keeping them accountable rather than themselves. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm totally honest, I mean, we've had meetings recently with, because what we now do at Wellbeing People is work very much like, I guess our core business is around the sort of the business to business market, but we also do do a few sort of public health programs, and we've historically worked on a lot of initiatives around there. So we had a meeting recently with some public health providers, and I honestly think this is the biggest mindset shift that is just such a barrier in public health, is that public health feel like people of inequality or that are in challenging situations, that you have to spoon feed them. And what we're trying to say is that doesn't work, because then you come in as this authoritative figure that they have, that then you're not relatable anyway, and then you're telling people what to do, and it just doesn't work. Whereas, like, if you can empower someone and instill them with that belief that they can do this and that they can take ownership of it, then that's where you really do see sustainable change. And it's such a barrier at public health at the moment that I will keep fighting away at.
Keep beating the drum away.
I don't seem to be chipping too much away into the stone, but who knows?
Yeah, I'm sure you are. I'm sure you definitely are. And they go, here's Pip again, beating away, chipping away at the stone, isn't it? So if we move into, because quite a bit of the questions we've looked at and also about well-being is a lot of people I hear, and also recently, is about stress in the workplace.
Yes.
What would you kind of, from your perspective, what is stress in the workplace? What's that really mean, Pip?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, because I think stress in the workplace alludes to the fact that it doesn't happen, or that it's separate from stress outside of work. And I think this is the biggest shift that I've definitely seen in the last, I guess, decade or so, where it used to very much be that it was like, I take this version of Pip to work and then this version of Pip stays at home, sort of thing. And actually what we're seeing much more is that no, you take your whole being to work. So that means that whatever emotional, physical, chemical stress that you've got going on, you're also then taking to work. Now, I guess where that becomes then very tricky from a manager's point of view or an organization's point of view is that some of those stresses might be rooted in things that are outside of work. You could take childhood trauma, could be, someone chooses to, I don't know, smoke excessively, whatever it is. Those are then different types of stresses that happen outside of work that are then going to have an impact on that individual in work. And it's where is that line a lot of the time for businesses and for managers that then don't overstep the mark into people's personal lives, but equally if you're bringing your whole self to work, then there's that constant balancing juggling act. And so stress in the workplace ultimately boils down to the same thing as stress outside of the workplace, which I really like. There's a number of different models and ways that people explain it. I quite like the chiropractic view on it, where there's kind of three main things. You've got your physical stress, as in, it could be from childbirth is a physical stress, car accident, a physical stress, but equally it could be from simple things like sitting for prolonged periods of time are going to cause a physical stress on your system. A lot of people think that it's, musculoskeletal that happens when you sit for a long period of time, but actually, you compress your lungs when you sit from a long period, so then your breathing changes, which can then send feedback loops back to your brain to say, okay, I'm breathing shallowly, does that mean I'm anxious? And then you can see where then mental stress can then start feeding into that. So you've got physical stress as one side, then you've got emotional stress, which really are your thoughts, your feelings, your belief. This is where mental health comes into play. These could be stresses that come from outside of you, like work pressures, the environment, all sorts of things like that, or things internally like your own belief system and that sort of thing. And then the final one is chemical stresses, which again, in our modern world, we have to at least have an insight over, and that could be processed foods, alcohol, drug use. It could even be the air that we breathe. If it's, if you're in the middle of Hong Kong and it's very polluted, you're going to be breathing in things that is going to cause a stress on your overall system. So a short definition, I guess, is stress in the workplace is anything that falls under that physical, emotional and chemical that you'll then bring into work.
Yeah. And it's fascinating that people seem to think, which I love the bit of, home is home, work is work. You split them apart and that's it, and it's not. And this is I think the key to the question is, people can't suddenly just switch off from home and then at work it's a completely different version of themselves. And I've definitely noticed with the best leaders I've ever worked with are able to pick up on those nuances, those physical, emotional kind of differences with that colleague, to spend time with them rather than just walk past and ignore and go, well, that's their home life then, and put them into boxes. It's
Yeah.
about having that understanding more, those softer skills, to
Yeah.
really kind of work with those colleagues. Because you're right, we can't just all turn that kind of dial off and then start work, can we?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I've been in meetings where, someone's had a grievance, in their family. Someone's passed away, and so if you don't then take that second to just check in with someone and see how they are, and you just go into work mode, that person's going to be so checked out that they're not going to be listening to anything that you say anyway. So it's definitely about finding that balance. But I think it is very tough, because as a manager, we do a lot of manager training, and I know that's one of the things that people don't want to intrude into people's lives. So it's almost, they do it through a level of respect, as well as, some people do it through a level of, they don't have the confidence in you mentioned soft skills, but Great Place to Work, their recent report basically says the managers that or what employees want from managers is that human-centric approach.
Yeah.
And like, treat me as a human first and then a worker second. And you can do that through a number of different ways. I'm sure we'll get into it, but some really easy tools that you can then do that, just to, if you don't naturally have those soft skills, as you mentioned, then that's just something that it's all teachable, and it's all learnable. So that's just something to start practicing and playing around with.
And I think excuse me, the bit on there is, I think people make it out to be this big thing about how to speak to people, but quite often it's the easiest conversation of like, how are you? You don't see yourself today. Should we have a chat, have a cup of tea and a natter? It was one of my phrases, rather than putting it into a big professional, I've got to have a meeting, where the colleague will close up and not kind of reveal what's really going on. And what would you say, like you said there about home or work, what would you say the different types of stresses you see or encounter, Pip, through the Wellbeing People Limited? What would you see as the differences you see from colleagues?
Yeah, so I mean, the physical ones, I guess, are where we do a lot of our behavioural change thing around. So a lot of things around sleep is obviously a very big one in the last few years, or lack of sleep, should I say. Sitting. I think people don't realise actually how much of an impact sitting for long periods of time has on your body.
It's made you want to sit up properly. As soon as you said that,
the funny thing is, so I come along and say all of these things, and people all of a sudden like sitting there or drinking water. I joke that I've made a career. I joke that I've made a career on telling people how to drink water. But so those are the physical stresses that we definitely see a lot of, that where people, you just fall into work, and it's so easy to do that if you haven't done that habit design around your daily work, to really optimize. I often say to people, it's like turning your computer on and trying to run on like Windows 97. If you don't drink water, sleep properly, do some movement, you're going to make yourself more productive. That will make everything else easier. So those are the physical sides. I guess from the emotional side, the ones we see a lot of is definitely poor management, and that's not necessarily the manager's fault. I think one of the recent I think it was in CIPD released a report recently where only about 50% of managers feel like they have adequate training to even do the people management side of things. So, that it's not necessarily to berate managers, it's to say that, we need to all do that level much better. Managers, and then work pressures. And this, I guess, comes from both sides, in that the individual often needs a little bit of help with healthy boundaries, as well as the workplace needs a little bit of help with healthy boundaries. It's very rare that we see these ones, or one side or the other. So I would say those are probably the biggest ones that we're addressing at the moment, like the kind of digital wellbeing side, just to help people put some boundaries in place.
Yeah, and it's I think like during the pandemic as well was heightened, where boundaries have been crossed.
Yes.
And I've seen that a lot, where people do it for good intent but seem to get the boundaries blurred. And I'm really pleased there, because I don't like berating line managers, because they do a good job. But a lot of people are really good at what they did before in silo, then the next day they're promoted and they go, da-da, you're now going to manage 10 people or 20 people, and they don't really know what to do. And I think the CIP did the paper, I think in 2020, saying 50% of the time line managers make situations worse, not because they're being malicious, they just know what they know. That makes sense. So I find it fascinating.
Yeah, and also it's a bit of a compound effect as well, right? That if you've got a manager who has been promoted to that, they're going to know themselves, okay, I don't have these skills. So then that's going to heighten their stress. When we are when we are highly stressed, our executive function of our brain shuts down, which means we don't make as good decisions. So, then it just becomes this vicious cycle where you've got stressed managers trying to look after people who, let's face it, we're coming off of the back of a pandemic. People are still, have really big struggles around their well-being, and they're looking to their manager to lead by example, but actually their manager is at the end of their tether as it is. So it's just a vicious storm, unfortunately, that's been brewing, like during the pandemic and post-pandemic, really.
And it's one of those storms that will brew again, because I've noticed more and more about hybrid working. People are going back 5 days a week. So we're seeing that's going to be another transition again of kind of where people are uneasy. They've got used to different ways of lives, etc. So I can see that storm kind of moving forward. And I think in not last week and the one before, I think AO, the CEO of AO in the Independent, said it's working from work life, not working from home. So I think that storm's going to come. But it's in how people work with it or really try to understand their colleagues will be the winners rather than being done to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that, that's why I'm very lucky with my job and things, because I can walk into any room and know that actually if every single person in that room prioritized their well-being, so if I did my job well enough and inspired them to prioritize their well-being, it doesn't matter what else is on their priority plate, whether it's family, whether it's work, whether it's career or whatever. I know that if they prioritize their well-being, everything else is going to get better. But what we typically find is that people fall into one of two mindsets, one being the success mindset, where it's like, I have to work all hours, I can't take any holiday off, I have to get there. When they prioritize that, inevitably at some point their own well-being suffers, their relationships suffer, and it all comes crumbling down. And then the other mindset is the sort of the carers mindset, which is, your teachers, your nurses, your parents, that they're like, once they're okay, then I'll be okay. Which again, we see, you get to a point where you burn yourself out, you then can't look after them, you can't look after yourself, it all comes crumbling down. And it's only when we can help people get that shift to go, actually, when I prioritize myself first, it doesn't matter what storm comes through or transitions come through. It's going to take an awful lot to knock me off my podium. And that's really where I guess I see it as a privilege that, well, that's the industry that I've chosen, that, that we can actually really affect key change when we do actually start prioritizing well-being instead of paying it a bit of lip service.
Yeah. And it's it's definitely the point. Probably in my late 30s, I found that I was comfortable in my own skin. So I went through that transition of imposter syndrome and all that kind of stuff. And then late 30s, I thought, do you know what, I've got to look after myself a bit better. And then you notice the difference more. And it's a bit like on an aeroplane, isn't it? When they say put your mask on first before children. Yeah. That you start to go, I kind of get that. And even taking serious sleep. As I got older, I took sleep a bit more serious and went, do you know what, it pays dividends to have a good night's sleep and those kind of things. But then it enables you to be better at your job and help people. Whereas I think too many people do it the other way around, of I've got to put others first, and then they're the ones that get burnt out or hurt in the long run, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, many people said, Pip, I get it. That all sounds great, but you wait till you have children. And, I had my first child a year ago, and I'm not saying that I don't ever put him first, because of course I do. Yeah. But actually, I do make sure that I still prioritize my well-being, because I know that then that benefits me as a working mum as well. And I have still proven that you can do that. And so, everyone's situation is different. And we always talk about the fact that well-being is personal, subjective and universal, but it can be done, and it can be done with really simple things like you just mentioned, prioritizing your sleep, drinking a bit more water. These things really do make a difference when you have that compound effect. So absolutely.
And Pip, when would you notice, what are the signs when you see someone that is suffering, or living with stress, what signs would you start to see?
Yeah, so again, because it's personal, generally people will have very different tendencies. So you could have some physical signs and symptoms. So you could have things like breaking out in mouth ulcers, for instance, is quite a common one, because when we're stressed, we burn through our minerals a lot quicker.
Right.
If we burn through our minerals, then our mouth is one of the areas that we see that. So if you suffer from mouth ulcers, cold sores, those sorts of things, that can be your stress tendency. I know for myself personally, my throat's often the first thing to go, so I get even cracklier and hoarser than usual. But again, it can be anything for different people, and I think the key thing that I always try to encourage people to recognize is, what is your stress tendency. You know, I once worked with a lady, had this, she would come out in this huge rash up the side, you know, so you can get skin irritations, all sorts of things. From a mental health point of view, or from a mental side of things, generally, and this is very stereotyping, I don't really like to put people in boxes, but it tends to help people. Generally, you'll fall into one of three. So either overwhelmed, anxious, very worried, sort of the overthinker. You'll notice that then, like, that just goes into overdrive and you just can't stay present at all. The second type of person is the sort of irritable, frustrated, very impatient, sort of very direct, angry person. That's my tendency, by the way. If I start going a bit too sort of sharp tongue, then I notice my stress levels have got a bit high. And the third type of person is the sort of want to go and hide, so withdraw from the situation, go into a cave, you know, and really like pull yourself away. I think it's really important to recognize that we do have these different stress tendencies, because then not only can you recognize that in yourself, but then you can start recognizing that in your team as well. Prime example, if I'm stressed and my mum's stressed, I have a sharp tongue, she goes worried. So put us in a room together when we're both stressed, and that's just a recipe for disaster, right? I'm going to make her cry, she's going to make me angry. So, you know, it's just not going to work. And we can start then having that empathy for people if we recognize those tendencies.
And I think there's a couple of bits that come in today about being observant to those things. And even if someone says, like, how are you feeling? They go, you know, I've got a couple of mouth ulcers, or they're the things we should be able to start to pick up on, rather than walk away and go, okay, they're a bit off sorts. Actually lean into it. And like with you, I know when I become more stressed, I get a rash comes up in my fingers, so I get kind of that, and I always go, well, I don't think I'm stressed, but I know I am, so I can feel that. And I like the bit there about sharp tongue, because I can turn up my dial that's a bit more direct and a bit blunt, from that perspective. But they're the things that we should, if we're aware of them, we can start to notice, can't we, in other people, to kind of then, and I you know, not to over label, but care about people. That's my humanistic approach about, actually, how are they, rather than let's just ignore them, they'll get better tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's then about creating those spaces, right, that then people can share those things openly. Because I think, again, going back to what I said earlier, where people feel like, oh, you know, well, I wouldn't feel comfortable to point out, oh, you've got that rash on your finger, are you stressed, sort of thing, you know, because that could then, you know, trigger someone, and they go, oh, no, you know, that's none of your business.
I'll be even worse than that, wasn't it? You go, how dare you say that?
Exactly. But again, just to have that awareness and to start building that rapport with people, to just go, you know, I notice you don't seem yourself. Is everything okay? You know, you do that in the right way, you'll create that space. If someone is stressed, I mean, as long as you create that safe space, the likelihood is they will verbal diarrhea what is on their mind to you, because unfortunately we live in a world that's very connected, and yet nobody actually listens. So so, you know, if you create that safe space where that person feels seen and heard, they will tell you what's on their mind, and you'll be able to have that and sometimes I think the biggest one for managers as well is they feel like they need to problem solve that. So whatever that person's told them, actually, for most people, they just want to be seen and heard. You know, you might need to signpost them to something, but you don't have to fix anything. You know, you just hold that space for someone and let them speak, and you'll notice like the weight drop off of them, and them find their own, you know, their own solutions as well.
And that kind of falls nicely into like the next question of, what if someone does come and speak to say that I'm stressed at work? What should we do? And I think you've touched on a little bit already about giving that safe space and that kind of thing. What should we be doing for that person?
Yeah, so obviously every organisation's different. So where you signpost and things like that is going to be dependent on your organisation. Some of the things that I always really try to drill home, especially to our team, is like REAP isn't there for when you have hit rock bottom. You know,
Yeah.
like use it before rock bottom even comes up. I talk a lot about feedback frustration. So the second you start feeling that feedback frustration, that's the time to start acting rather than letting that frustration just get louder and louder and louder. So where you signpost is going to be different for each individual organisation, because you're going to have different things set up, from mental health first aiders to EAP programs to internal programs. But really just holding that safe space for a person. So and asking them, you know, I guess this is where we're seeing much more that people and organisations are wanting to go into that sort of coach culture of coaching, where you know, it's training managers with those skills where they can then hold that space and feel comfortable to ask questions and to allow that to happen. But what I always encourage people to do is to not lead with the "my door is always open" approach, because it doesn't matter if your door's open. Like, you know, I know that my other half will listen to me if I tell him, you know, can you sit down and listen to me? But actually him sitting me down and going, Pip, something doesn't seem right, are you okay, is going to open me up an awful lot quicker. So you know, we need to have the same sort of approach at work, where it's how can we start creating those environments for that to happen. So prime example, in our meetings, we encourage people to do a win, learn or share. So it brings this human element to the meeting before we get onto the business stuff. So, you know, whether it's a monthly meeting or whatever, we have a win, learn or share. A win is either something good that's happened in your personal or professional life. A learn is something that didn't go to plan, but you learned from it, because, you know, we learn best from our failures. And then a share is just, you know, there might be something on your mind, maybe, I don't know, your cat's passed away or something that day, you know, then you just want to share that to go, do you know what, I'm not in my best headspace at the moment because this has happened. It only then takes like 1 minute, 2 minutes per person. And so it stops the whole, oh, I went out on Saturday night and this happened, blah, blah, which I know for someone who, you know, is that irritable person, you know, that can be really hard for that person to sit on a call and listen to somebody else really sharing all of this stuff. And they're thinking, I've got another 6 meetings to get onto, and this person's banging on about their Saturday night. But it does allow that human element to come in, so that then you know everyone's headspace before then you move on with the business stuff. So that can be a really easy one. In one-to-ones, you know, asking how are you, but then following it up with genuine questions. So my team, for instance, I'll ask them, like, they know me very well, so it doesn't come across like American or too state, but I'm like, come on, how are you out of 10? Like, if you were to rank your well-being and stuff. And so then they give me a score, and then I can follow up with that. And one of the questions I'll always follow up with is, you know, is your work positively or negatively impacting that number? Because sometimes, you know, we think, oh, someone said a 7, that means they hate their work. Actually, it might just be something massive is going on for them outside of work. And it's only when you then ask a couple more questions that you go, well, actually, work is the thing that's really helping them at the moment. So, you know, that's fantastic, you know. So I think definitely setting it up in one-to-ones and setting your meetings up with this human-centric element, which doesn't need to take a huge amount of time and will really drive connection and culture in your business, is a big way to address the stress side of things.
And it's the bit there of it. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it takes a bit of thought. So that's the bit to be kind of more conscious around it. But actually, win, learn, and share, really nice way to frame it, so we get people talking. And I kind of really like that bit. And also looking in one-to-ones, holding that empathetic kind of part rather than sympathetic, because I see so many people dive into sympathy mode, whereas actually that person just wants to blur and get stuff off, rather than going, well, I've gone through that and that's happened to me, because then the agenda changes to the other person. So just really holding that space makes a world of difference, doesn't it?
Definitely. And that's just the different levels of listening, isn't it? And again, if you notice that in yourself, that you're one of those people who either want to jump in and fix things, or you know, jump in and make the story back about you, then you know, do some training and go on some you know, basic coaching skills or the soft skills sort of workshops where you know, you can experience that firsthand and understand how creating that space will just, you know, really open people up to a different sort of level.
Yeah. And just before we move on, I like the bit where I've seen it so many times when people go, I've got an open door policy. And I go, how often does that person knock on that door and tell you what's going on? Not that often, but I've
Yeah,
got an open door policy. And I go, that's the point. Actually, the people aren't going to knock at your door and say, I'm going through menopause or I'm going through this or I'm experienced. It's actually how do you connect with those colleagues that
yeah.
enable those conversations rather than it's all on your terms that your door's open.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I mean, even here at Wellbeing People, recently actually I was sitting in a senior leadership team meeting, and it was brought up on the agenda, like, do we really want to send out this EMPS survey again? Like, we've sent it out every quarter. Like, are you sure we want to send it out again? And I'm like, yes, it has to go out every quarter. So then, a lot happens in 3
Yeah.
months. If someone has something, then that feedback frustration, we've done it so often now that then it might be just something little, but someone then will put it on and we can address it straight away,
Yes.
rather than waiting until it's this almighty thing, and then
Yeah.
they might come bouldering through the door, but they'll
Yeah.
be kicking it down and screaming and saying this is happening, that's happening, rather than let's be proactive with it and try and get that
Yeah.
feedback in
Yeah.
first.
And that's like in the world that I also work in, the mediation world, when we see problems that got out of control,
Yeah,
it becomes a big unwieldy beast. Whereas actually if you unravel back, it's probably quite a small thing, but it's not been
definitely.
addressed. So like with that, I'm a great fan of like getting regular touch points,
Yeah,
and then actually you can nip the small things in the bud rather than it become a big audacious, which becomes uncontrollable. So
yeah,
yeah, really
absolutely.
definitely stick to it. I'll be on your beating the drum there, Pip. Stick to it.
Perfect. I'll
Yeah.
share this with the team, just that
Share
it's
it with
not
the
just
team.
me.
Yeah, so Steve said. So what other support is out there for people? I know about EAP lines. Is what other support is available to people that are, stress or well-being, would you say?
Oh, am I allowed to selflessly plug in that case?
You can, yes, you can. Of course you can. Of course you can.
So the program that we run is the Recalibrate Wellbeing program. So that's a program that then helps exactly like what we've been talking about, right? It empowers people to take ownership for their own well-being. So they go onto the program, they experiment, we give them a topic every single week. So some weeks, for instance, it is sleep, some it is around movement medicine, that sort of thing. And we give them the choice of 3 progress experiments. They choose which progress experiment they're going to commit to, and then they come back, have some self-reflection on it. The number one thing people tell us is that it's really heightened their self-awareness. So if we can heighten people's self-awareness around their own well-being, around their own tendencies, around their habits, then it gives them an opportunity to change it. So we don't come in and say, you should eat this nutritional plan or anything like that. It's all about really seeing where that skill gap is, and then having that sort of shared knowledge and knowledge transfer over. Because let's face it, none of us are taught well-being in school, are we? I think they are starting to now, but I certainly wasn't. And so that program works really well, and then we have ambassador training off the back of that, where then anyone who's graduated through the program, we then train as ambassadors. So we train all of the soft skills around emotional intelligence, around signposting, around those communicational skills, to then basically the organizations plug that back in, so that then we don't need to hold their hand for the rest of the
Yes.
time. So there's programs like ours, there's a number of different companies that are doing them and things. It is really about getting that training and starting really with the leaders, and those leaders, really the biggest one is that mindset shift to go, okay, actually if I prioritize my own well-being, is this then going to have that knock-on effect for me and my productivity? And then managers are going to see that that's how I'm
Yeah.
leading by example, then that's going to fold through. And so for us, really, it's getting the leadership team with that mindset shift. Whether it's a level of coaching that needs to come in, that often works very well as well, because of this sort of like blurred lines and how unique it is for everybody. But yeah, and otherwise, obviously, there's a number of organisations. I know Stress Management Society are out there. They have a lot of free resources. I mean, our website is full of a load of blogs and resources and things that you can reach out to. All I would say is, like, I'm a really big fan of experiential learning. So learn something, but then put it into practice and start doing it, so that then you can learn from your failures and reflect on, okay, that worked, but that didn't work quite so well in our organization, and how can we evolve that? And I think a lot of the time people are scared to start. And you know, if you can say, right, this is the intention, this is the direction I'm going in, I might not get it right first time, but that's okay. Then you can start moving that way. But I think for a lot of people, you know, coming back to your earlier question around what are some of the big stress issues, you know, perfectionism is a huge one, people pleasing is a huge one, and being a workaholic is a huge one. So you put those, you know, 3 in there, and then you can see why it's really hard for people to then get that mindset shift to prioritizing well-being. Total side note, but it was probably the biggest one for me. I remember my other half said to me, Pip, like, you just seem really stressed, and he called me out on it, and he was like this was when I was running my own business, and I said to him, yeah, but Tom, you don't understand, like, I love my job, like I love helping people, it doesn't feel like work to me. And this was his response. So anyone who suffers from a bit of workaholism, his response to me was, Pip, alcoholics love alcohol, doesn't make it right to pour it on your Cheerios in the morning, so it doesn't make it right to work all of the time. And I was like, oh yeah, good point. It hit me like a knife, and it made me go, oh, okay, yeah, I can see I'm a bit out of balance there. So you know, there's just a number of different things that we can then, once we heighten our self-awareness, that's really the starting point.
And I love going back again where you said about first of all, you've had that realization from your partner, which is, you know, it's great to have partners. And I always remember many years ago when Blackberries first come out, and I was addicted to that, because I was like, oh, I'm so chuffed, I've got a Blackberry. And my wife and I went on holiday, and I remember a couple of days in, my wife said, oh, just to let you know, Steve, who have you come on holiday with? And I said, well, you know, really excited, we look forward to the holiday. She said, well, it feels as though you're on holiday with your Blackberry. And that was like the punch in the face for me then to go, yeah, that's quite right, actually. And same as you, I love work, but there is that priority and family life that goes with it. And I think also the other bit which I loved about the leadership, people seem to think, even in the world that I work in, conflict resolution, that it's all nice and happy and clappy, etc. But what I just love then is if you get the leaders right, more productive, you know, better at work, those kind of things that people just don't seem to connect with, that you're going to be more efficient, more productive, those kind of things, better customer service. We're not just doing it for fun, are we? If that makes sense.
Absolutely. You know, and I mean, the biggest one really is that as a leader, you want to be able to respond and not react. The second that you're stressed in any capacity, and like I mentioned, going right back to the beginning, when we're looking, this isn't just, you know, mental stress, which is what, whenever I sit down and talk to leaders, you know, they often go, I manage my stress really well. But when I actually break it down and go, oh, actually, you know, let's have a look at these physical stresses. You know, you might feel like mentally you're coping with everything, but there's a difference between coping and being optimal. And so the big difference with well-being is that if you can get all of that stress, you know, into a place where actually you are managing it effectively, well, then you have a space, and your brain will actually operate in a way where you'll respond rather than react. And I can guarantee you it will be all of those times that you reacted are those times that get you into trouble, and that's when they need to call you in.
Yes, that's when we get the phone call come in. So when should people start to see a difference in themselves? So for example, the work that you do, Pip, and people then start to really look at themselves, when should people start to see a difference? Probably $64 million question, but when would you see a difference in somebody?
Yeah, so through the Recalibrate Wellbeing program, I would generally say if people are adhering to it, because obviously, you know, we're not magicians, you have to do the work. But if people are adhering to it, around about week 4, we notice that people's energy really starts going up quite dramatically. By week 6, they'll have had quite a few insights, and they'll be like quite impressed with, you know, different things that are happening. By the end of the program, but by sort of 12 weeks there, I mean, I've had leaders turn around to me and go, Pip, when you first came in, I was that stereotypical, you know, I grew up in you work harder, you roll your sleeves up, don't whine about all of this stuff, just get on with it, sort of thing. Whereas now, 12 weeks in, I can totally understand why not only do I want to do this, but I want my entire company to do this, because I'm so much more productive. I'm so much happier at work and home. I have better boundaries, you know, all of these sorts of things. but it is unfortunately in my industry, and unless I might find a magic thing, but people have to experience it, which is,
Yes.
which is why we publish as many stories as we can, and we're doing much better at that, because people then can start relating to it. But even then, until you experience it yourself, especially if you've been in a level of pain for a long period of time. So I often talk about like a bit of a spectrum, where if you've been in pain, and whether that's mental pain with a mental illness or physical pain, then it's very hard to actually imagine yourself as someone who has energy, who wakes up in the morning, bright-eyed, ready to start the day, all of those sorts of things, because pain is that thing that literally shuts down everything, and all you can focus on is what's just in front of you. But when we start seeing people come out of that and then move more towards a bit of balance, and then more towards thrive, I mean, the difference in people is just dramatic. That you see people go on to do incredible things because they've had this like real life experience where they've gone from a place of pain to then of thriving. And then it almost seems like, well, anything's possible because I've been able to almost upgrade every cell in my body, kind of thing.
And it's that bit of colleagues going through it, that it's not going to be an overnight fix, which a lot of people seem to think. Even like losing weight, they go, oh, I did a run yesterday and I should lose it. That's not the real world, but putting that effort in will give that longevity and that thrive to push forward. But it does take time and consistency, those kind of things. But going back to we said at the beginning, by empowering people, the accountability and ownership, rather than I'll train you one day, then if I don't do it, it's down to me not doing it because Pip hasn't trained me, rather than that person on their own 2 feet, which makes a huge difference, isn't it? And you must see some really good kind of life-changing stories and behavior from people once they've started to hit that 4-week, 6-week mark, to see a real difference. You must kind of thrive on that, mustn't you?
Oh, I mean, so again, complete transparency, but when I came back from maternity leave, I said to my MD, who actually I'll tell you about his little story in a second if we've got time, but I said to my MD, I'm really I'm really missing my mojo. Like I'm just like really struggling to get back into it and stuff. And he was like, this is the impatience in me. He was like, Pip, it's only been a month. Like, just let you get your feet under the table and like just slowly ease yourself back in and stuff. And literally the next day, one of the testimonial videos came through where one of my coaches had interviewed someone, and they were talking about the program, and just like that, my mojo went straight back. I was like, that's the reason we do it. Well, we genuinely do transform lives, and people, have this incredible, you can't unlearn what you learn as well, so people will then have this for the rest of their lives. I think God, there's no greater gift or thing that I would like to be doing with my time anyway.
That's fantastic. And it's like with I think when we connected before, the passion that come through from both of us, we love what we do, makes a real difference. And actually our colleagues can see that, and our customers and clients can pick up on that energy from that perspective. So just a kind of last kind of questions to pick up with. What's on your development for this year? So if someone said, Pip, what are you learning or developing in 2023? What would be one of your goals you're working on, or behaviors?
Oh, that's an easy one, because I'm on a course tomorrow. So I'm actually so throughout my career, I've always almost been trained informally through coaching skills, and so I've never actually done a specific qualification. So I'm now currently on an executive coaching course, so that then, because we're looking to see actually, do we put a little bit more coaching element alongside the program, for especially for leaders and for people who maybe need additional support around that side of things. So that's what I'm currently learning, and it's lovely because well, shout out to my cousin Natasha Millard, who runs her own consultancy and things like that practice, but she was the one who informally trained me, because she basically said, Pip, what you're doing isn't personal training, you're doing a level of coaching, because I couldn't understand when I took on my first employees. I was like, how can I get them to deliver the program in the same way as me? So I got her in to look at it and things, and she said you're coaching without realizing that you're coaching. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and what's nice is I'm currently on the course, and so far there's not been like a massive red like flag. I was thinking, oh, I'm going to go on this course and I'm going to be that person who like got taught to drive on their granddad's estate, and then has all of these awful habits. But so far it's it's going okay.
But I remember when I did my executive coaching diploma, I thought beforehand I had quite a swagger. I was like, oh yeah, I'm a good coach. I've been in the banking industry for long years. We had lots of coaching. And then I suddenly realised when I went on my course, I was like, oh, I think I've just been giving feedback, to be honest. I've
Oh,
not really been
really?
coaching people, but I've glossed it up in this world of coaching. So I think it's fantastic. More people that can, because coaching is not just about work stuff. It's a life skill. It's a great skill to
Yeah.
have. And I think that's a lot with a lot of these things. It's not just about work. They're great life skills, aren't they?
Definitely. Well, I mean, and that I guess feeds into what we were saying at the beginning, that you bring all, your whole self to work, but also
Yeah.
anything you learn at work, you then bring your whole self back home as well,
Yes.
don't you? That then you
Yeah.
get this lovely skill transfer
Yeah.
as well. So
Well,
yeah,
I always say
absolutely.
when I'm training new mediators, and on the next day I said, "Did you use any of your Jedi mind tricks at home?" And they go, "Yeah, my partner picked up on it." So I always find it fascinating from that point of view. So Pip, just to finish up today, because I'm sure we can talk for ages, which is wonderful. How can people connect with you? Get to speak to you, those kind of things, Pip.
Yeah, so me personally, I guess there's two main places, which is we have a Wellbeing People community, which is on LinkedIn and then also on Facebook. It's in there that we run monthly progress experiments. So this month, in the month of June, we're running one around morning movement. So if people want to see, if I experiment with morning movement, does that then improve some of our hypotheses, which you'll find out in the community? Then those are the best places. So you can just search those in either of those. If you're a business and you're wanting to support your employees around wellbeing, or maybe a leader, then probably the website is the best place, which is wellbeingpeople.com. And yeah, I'm sure the team will be more than happy to support you.
Yeah, wonderful. So can I just say a huge thank you today, Pip? Really, really enjoyed, I know, following on from one of our conversations today and through our questions. And I'm sure our paths will cross again, without a doubt. But I just want to say a big, big thank you today. I thoroughly enjoyed catching up with you.
Oh, no, likewise. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Pip.